I usually start my sheath patterns with a 90-degree angle like this. Doesn't matter what kind of knife I'm doing, it just kind of gives me some perspective on how straight the knife will be in the sheath. And that's a French curve I use there to draw the top of the sheath. And I'm using a compass set at about a 1/2 inch to give me room for the welt on the sheath. Try to leave a little bit of space in the spine to accept the width of the handle. And I usually try to test fit with paper before I go and start cutting leather. The more you can test fit before you start cutting leather, the less material waste you'll have and fewer surprises down the road. Here's a little tip I learned from some leather forumer. There's no magic proportions on using pine sol and water. I think just a little bit goes a long way, so it's not a scientifically made formula. It just seems to be a nice additive to keep the water from oxidizing on the leather. If you get dust or something on the leather, the pine sol helps kind of keep the black spots down. It was a problem for me in the past, so. Using some stiffer board for the welt will help it not move on you while you're trying to trace it on the leather. The thicker the material you use to trace the welt, the better. If you try using paper, it can just kind of distort and you'll end up with a welt that's not quite the shape it needs to be. Double up cardstock or something like that would work. Most of my drawings of sheaths that I do and most of my patterns I do on poster board. In each of my projects, I try to modify the process as I go, and on this one in particular, one of the things I wanted to do was avoid using a stitching groover. The stitching groover tends to cut through the outer layer of leather and it weakens it a great deal. So one of the things I wanted to try to do in this video was to not use a stitching groover, but instead use wing dividers or a compass to mark my stitching lines and then punch through only where the stitching holes would be. But the outermost layer of the leather is where the leather gets its strength from. You can remove all the grain you want from the inside, but that outer layer needs to be intact. Especially on the really small, really dense stitching lines, you can really cut through if you groove too deeply in the leather when you're laying out your stitching lines. Circle stencil I use quite a bit. I really like to put these videos together to show just a quick rundown on the project. It's very thorough, I think, even if it's hard to follow in some ways. So if there's enough interest in any particular project, I would probably be interested in slowing it down and releasing it in pieces. But to be able to just do an entire project that took me a couple weeks of work and throw it together in a 20-minute video that pretty much includes every step to some degree, it's a pretty neat thing, I think, to do, and it gives you a good reference point even for your own future projects. If you're working on something, you can definitely see where you need to improve when you're scanning over video of yourself working for hours and hours. It's been super insightful for me, and it even changes the way I work. When the camera's running, I'm just a lot more focused, and I try not to waste movement or time to save myself editing. It's a pretty interesting way to do things. Some clear cutting mats. I think they're cutting mats from a dollar store or something. I think it's just like a protective mat that's meant to use like as a cutting board or something like that. I think I paid like $1 for them. I got a couple of them just to protect my main cutting board from dye. And I'll even use them when I'm cementing things and just any kind of liquid I don't want to have on my main cutting mat. My favorite sequences are these dyeing sequences and the sewing sequences. It never gets old. It's just kind of hypnotic watching the dye dry. You can see it in real time drying pretty fast, but when you see it on video, it's just mesmerizing. Same with the oiling and just any finish. It's kind of neat to see it dry quickly. Now, when it comes to applying finishes and different things, I try to use an oil and a conditioner, and that's just typically my formula. I'll use an oil to saturate the leather, and then I'll put a top coat conditioner on it. That's typically Aussie conditioner or something like that. So the neat's foot penetrates, and then the Aussie conditioner protects. Now you'll see that I'm using some Cocobolo burnishing tools on my Dremel. This was just another experiment. I wanted to see if these tools were worth using, and bought a set off eBay very cheap, and it comes with a few different tips. I think I paid $15 or $16 for it, and it saves a lot of time and effort, and they're just kind of fun to use. I don't know if it's going to be a full-on replacement for burnishing by hand. Probably not, but I like to just kind of mix it up and use both. For little tiny pieces, it's pretty nice to have the Dremel, just because you don't have to worry as much about grip when you're pushing and trying to, hold shape with something small. But the Dremel's been super handy. I really like it. Another thing I did on this project was kind of take burnishing to the next level. I burnished some areas that I don't typically bother with, like the slide inside the belt and the inside of the top of the sheath. It was more of an experiment, but I really like the results, and it's something I'm going to keep doing. You can see the inside of the belt loop was pretty shiny, just from a little bit of burnishing. Just a few minutes of rubbing with the burnishing tool, it makes a huge difference. I use my water, my gum tragacanth, and beeswax kind of in that order for burnishing, pretty much on everything. I like using all three just in a row, and I've had pretty good results. Sometimes you can pass on the beeswax if you get a really good finish with the gum, but I like to use all three if I can. Start to see the shine from the inside of the welt just from hand burnishing. It's pretty neat how some pieces of leather really give a nice shine. Always follow the instructions on the barge cement. There's a good bit of drying time between these shots, and you just want to make sure you give it plenty of time to actually do its job. And the same goes for any type of conditioner or any product you use. Always follow the instructions. Sometimes it makes a huge difference on just the temperature you use it at, and some products you can't allow to get too cold or they just stop working altogether. Try to be very careful when clamping or squeezing the finished leather. You can really mar things up if you don't use something to protect the leather. Clothespins or clamps, or even just clamping something in the stitching horse, you want to use something to protect your leather. Favorite sequences is the sewing. It's fun to see it in high speed. And I think I speed these up about 16 times, so to give you some sort of reference for how long it takes. Another thing I tried on this project was on the back side of the sheath. Instead of drilling holes or punching all the way through, I tried using a sewing awl, a round awl, and I would punch my stitching holes on the front of the sheath, fold it together, cement it, and then use the round awl to press through the back side of the sheath, just to try some new technique. And it was pretty rough. It was pretty hard on my hands, so I don't know if I'll continue doing it that way. Maybe with a sharper awl it wouldn't have been so bad, but it was quite a struggle, but it really had a pretty nice result. I basically punched the holes in the front of the sheath and then marked a stitching groove in the back, and then pushed the awl from the stitching hole in the front into the groove that I'd cut in the back, or not cut in the back, but into the groove I'd made in the back with the wing dividers. See me clamping with little pieces of leather to protect the sheath pretty much every time I squeeze it. Anytime the sheath is being squeezed, I try to put something in between the sheath and the tool to protect it. Here we get into the main sewing. You can see me twisting the awl to get through the back side of the sheath, and it was a lot of work to do it this way, but it was a good experience just to give me something new to try out. I don't think I ever do anything the same twice, so I don't know what I'll do on the next sheath. I may stick to drilling through, but I also have some different awls I'd like to try out. So we'll just kind of see. I think maybe a sharper diamond awl might be a good way to go the next time I try. I don't think using a round awl like I do is the most common way to do this. Made these little finger protectors. The thread, after you pull it a few dozen times, it can cut you. I've had it cut me across my joints and my fingers. Also had it cut me lengthwise on my fingertips. As a matter of fact, I was cut last night lengthwise on my thumb. So the string and the tightness you have to pull it with, it can cut you pretty bad. On one of my videos, somebody commented and said I should try fishing line, and the thought of that fishing line cutting into my fingers, as hard as you have to pull it, it's just hard to protect yourself without going overboard and not being able to handle the needle and pull like you need to be able to. I think the only power tool I used in the whole process was my grinder. I used it to grind the excess down on that welt. That was the only thing I used a power tool for, and I think I could avoid that in the future even. Not that there's necessarily that as a goal, but just kind of makes it interesting if you don't have to use any hand tools. The first real test of my burnishing tools was doing the main edge on the sheath, and it turned out very, very nice. I was very pleased with it. Also, just pleased all around with how the sheath came together. The additional burnishing I did, and all the oiling and conditioning, it really turned out. It felt really nice in the hand. Kind of catch a glimpse of the shine of the edge after it was burnished. Makes a very big difference. And here's my wet molding. One thing that you'll notice is it drains out of the tip of the sheath, and that's just because I stopped sewing close to the end to give it a little bit of room in case water got inside the sheath. It has a place to go. I didn't cut any additional holes or mark anything. It just kind of naturally stops sewing at the fold and has enough room for water to pass through. If you do the wet forming like this, make sure you wrap your knife really well and that you unwrap it and dry it off immediately after you do the wet molding. The sheath needs to breathe and the blade needs to be dry, especially blades like mine that are typically carbon steel. And once it dries after this process, the sheath is nice and hard and ready to use. I also experimented with a Ryxon Pro sharpening system. I think it's a knockoff of an Apex Edge Pro, something like that, and I'll do a full review on that sharpener. I made some modifications and was pretty happy with how it turned out. It's slow, but you can get a really nice and consistent and mirror edge if you put your time into it. But like I said, I'll do another video where I made a few modifications and I'll share those with you guys. It's a pretty cheap sharpening system and it works pretty well, and there's not many other systems like it for the price. But I'll spare you the long sharpening process, but it took a few hours to get this knife where I wanted it to be. This was also another experiment. I just wanted to achieve a mirror edge, and I was able to do so with a Ryxon Pro and some stropping. It's not unusual for me to sharpen on my grinder and then use the buffer to get the mirror edge, but in this case, the stropping was able to get it where I want it to be, and I was able to shave with the knife and just do some basic testing of the edge. I was very happy with how this knife would cut. You can see here a little still shot of the edge. And I did a little paper testing and whatnot just because. A little bit of dry leather, and it cut and skived very nicely, better than I would have expected. Actually, Skive's better than one of my tools. I'll probably need to do some sharpening. But there it is, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and there'll be more to come. I've already got a few projects lined up and recorded, just need to upload them. But thank you guys for sticking in there and watching my series, and leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and give me some feedback and tell me what you think. Thank you guys for watching.